Good afternoon. On behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank, we welcome you to the event COVID-19 and the Future of Responsible Business, a conversation between IDB President Luis Alberto Moreno and Professor Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. Joining the conversation will be two global shapers, Ana Ruth Villarreal from the San Jose, Costa Rica hub, and Laura Reina from the Mexico City hub. The event will be in English with interpretation into Spanish and Portuguese. To select your language, please click on the world icon at the bottom of the screen and choose the language you want to hear. Please send your questions to paulc@iadb.org. President Moreno, please go ahead.
Well, good morning, everybody, and it's a real privilege and honor to have with us Professor Klaus Schwab. I've had the privilege of knowing Professor Schwab for now over 20 plus years, but as you all know, he's the founder of the World Economic Forum, which there is no place in the world where there is a meeting of the minds of business, of government, of civil society like that of the World Economic Forum. And he envisioned the forum as the place where we could really help improve the shape of the world. And that has been his mission for the past 50 years and has had a tremendous influence that has grown over the years in really bringing all of society together and understanding that it is working as society, as stakeholders together, that we can truly make a difference. So with that, it's really a privilege and an honor to welcome you, Professor Schwab. And I know you will want to do some introductory remarks, and then we'll start our conversation. So over to you, Professor Schwab.
Thank you very much, President Moreno, and thank you also for the great partnership which we have since so many years with the Inter-American Development Bank. In many areas, we are very proud of this cooperation. It is just a little bit over it's even less, it's 4 months ago that we met in Davos, and we all felt, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the World Economic Forum, and we all felt the world has some weaknesses, some deficiencies, but more or less we can manage it. And we said already, and we expressed it in the theme, stakeholders for a more cohesive and sustainable world, which meant we have to make sure that our global system becomes more cohesive and more sustainable. Now, in the meantime, this pandemic has hit the world and has hit in a way with disruptions probably never seen since World War II. And today I just got the risk report. We have a network of 300 risk experts around the world, and we asked them what will be the impact of the corona virus, of the COVID-19 virus. And I just show you rapidly, because it's amazing, how many vectors of our life are concerned and are affected. So let me just show you. I will only rapidly go through. The report will be tomorrow on our website, so you can download it. And let me see. Can we put it on? So the biggest fear is a prolonged recession of the global economy, followed by a surge in bankruptcies, particularly also the SMEs, and a wave of industry consolidation. Then we have failure of industries or sectors in certain countries to properly recover. We have high levels of unemployment, tighter restrictions on cross-border movement, weakening of fiscal positions, protracted disruption of global supply chains, economic collapse of an emerging market, cyber attacks, another global outbreak, So just roll through, I just show you all the list without going into it, but you see this crisis is not only disruptive, it is a change, a call for resetting our whole global system. If you look what's happening, we have actually three phases in this Corona or COVID crisis. We have first to fight, and most countries are still and will be for quite some time in the fighting mood. Then we have to recover. And finally, we have to reshape. We have to build back, and we have to build back better. And that's where the forum is now very much engaged in. Of course, we have developed a platform, and we are very active globally in fighting the virus. But we concentrate on preparing for the after COVID-19 era. Because the crisis offers a great opportunity to rebuild our systems. And here, I just want to mention maybe 10 areas where we really have to engineer major changes for the future. The world cannot come back to the old system. The world cannot just repair the old system. The world has to construct a new system. And that's what we call the global Great Reset. First, we have to, of course, reinvigorate economic growth. Here, as I would nearly say as a byproduct, we have to repair the sins of the past. We should not forget that we are asked to run fast, and we have a big backpack on our shoulders, which are the debts of the past, which certain people, and President Moreno, you probably have the better figures, but it's assumed that they will reach 350% of global GDP this year with all the measures which are undertaken. And longer term, we have to see how we get out of this global debt trap with maintaining a certain distributional changes. But then we have to achieve the SDGs and the Paris climate objectives. We know that if we do not address climate change, this will be the next big global challenge, which may be in its consequences even more serious compared to what we are seeing now. We need a new global contract, social contract. We know this crisis will create a lot of unemployment, particularly for the low-skilled people. So we have to reposition in our social contract health, job, skills, education. We need to rebalance the institutional structure because through the crisis, we created certain priorities. For example, the government taking priority over business, the government taking priority over individuals, the older generation, and that's my biggest concern, trying to solve certain issues probably on the back of the young generation. Then we have, of course, restructuring industries. The World Economic Forum has created in 19 different sectors so-called industry action groups. And it's really astonishing how all those industries will be reshaped with what's happening now. I'm just, let's say, take as an obvious example, the transportation industry, leisure industry, but on the positive side, you have all the digital industries, which have new opportunities. Then we have to, of course, restructure our global governance system and to see how we counterbalance national egoism nationalism which we see coming up everywhere. We have to promote regional development and cooperation, because what we see now with the deglobalization, we see a strengthening of nations. Australia, New Zealand, the ASEAN countries, hopefully the Latin American countries. And maybe finally, I should say, we have to see how we make best use of the new technologies in shaping this new era, which will or should be much more based on advancing well-being and not necessarily some material goods. So let me stop here. So I repeat, the forum is engaged in a major initiative looking at all those dimensions, coming up with proposals. But what is very essential is that this initiative is driven by the young generation, because it is the young generation which will have to suffer from the consequences of this crisis. And it's the young generations which should be much more in charge of the future. So one of our principles at the World Economic Forum is how can we engage the young generation much more in global multi-stakeholder processes, in global decision-making. And in order to achieve this objective, we have created quite some time ago our community of young global leaders. And I'm very proud that we have very successful role models. I think even President Moreno inside the bank, but all over Latin America, with former YGLs now even being presidents of the countries. And we have created, because we wanted to integrate even more the very young generation, between 18 and 30, we have created the community of global shapers, a community which is now represented in over 400 cities around the world, practically in each major Latin American city. And I'm very proud of what the global shapers are achieving. Just looking, for example, how much the global shapers are engaged in helping to alleviate the refugee issue caused by Venezuela. So, and I could go in many, many good examples, but why President Moreno, why don't we give the voice to a global shaper? We have some global shapers with us, and maybe Ana Ruth Villarreal from San Jose in Costa Rica. You just listened to my presentation of the Great Reset, which was very summarized, because there are so many tasks to. We have so many. I would say, weaknesses to repair, but also so many opportunities. When you look at the future, what are for you, let's say, the biggest priorities which such an initiative should achieve?
Muchas gracias, profesor, por la invitación. Sin lugar a dudas, creo que la primera de esas prioridades para el gran restablecimiento es el cierre de la brecha digital. La situación del COVID ha sacado a la luz, como nunca antes, pienso yo, las profundas asimetrías en nuestra sociedad. En países como los de nuestra región, el promedio del 50% de la economía es informal y el confinamiento ha dejado expuestos a los más vulnerables, aquellos que no viajan en el vagón de la cuarta revolución industrial. Por eso la Agenda 2030 nos obliga a tener como norte no dejar a nadie atrás, y por eso mismo creo que el cierre de la brecha digital es una de esas prioridades que los gobiernos deben tener como foco posterior a esta crisis. En segundo lugar, creo en tener estados inteligentes. La exsecretaria del Estado de los Estados Unidos, Madeleine Albright, ya mencionaba que los ciudadanos le hablan a sus gobiernos usando tecnología del siglo XIX, los gobiernos escuchan con tecnología del siglo XX, y ofrecen con soluciones del siglo XIX. En muchos países de Latinoamérica, los congresos, la pandemia han tenido que responder de forma expedita, aprobando nuevas leyes que modernicen o por lo menos intenten atender con prontitud los nuevos paradigmas de la producción que estamos viviendo. Esta pandemia ha dejado en evidencia que las relaciones laborales y productivas de nuestra región, concebidas en otras circunstancias, tienen enormes rezagos, por lo que debemos ser capaces de crear en el sistema lo que yo llamo el chip de la cultura innovadora, con capacidad de amoldarse a las circunstancias cambiantes de nuestro entorno. En tercer lugar, creo que debemos pensar en algo que he llamado una revolución educativa. Ya el último informe del futuro del trabajo del Foro Económico Mundial decía que lo que un estudiante aprendía al inicio de su carrera, cuando la terminaba, ya estaba por lo menos el 50% desactualizado. Lo que me lleva a pensar si nuestros sistemas educativos estaban ya preparados para afrontar una situación como esta. Y pues bueno, creo que por supuesto que no. Y creo que es porque como país o como región no hemos descifrado, o como sociedad no hemos descifrado cuáles son esos esquemas pedagógicos que nos enseñan a aprender por nuestra cuenta y a lo largo de la vida. Creo que hoy más que nunca es fundamental la existencia de un sistema entrelazado que permita a los jóvenes la articulación en sus estudios de acuerdo a sus necesidades y preferencias, el involucramiento de las familias en los procesos de aprendizaje, así como a las empresas en la formulación de programas educativos, que permitan la creación de habilidades muy mal llamadas blandas, porque yo creo que son estratégicas en nuestros jóvenes, y el cambio en los paradigmas de enseñanza, donde pasemos de un sistema que premia el uso de la memoria a donde prive la innovación, el desarrollo del pensamiento crítico, artístico, emprendedor, y que esto sea parte del sistema. Y por último, y no puedo dejar esto de lado, hay una política que creo que como costarricense es elemental y transversal a estas tres anteriores, y es el asegurar el acceso a la ciudadanía a un sistema de salud solidario y de calidad, que garantice la atención de una manera universal, que creo que es algo que a Costa Rica le ha funcionado mucho en esta circunstancia.
Muchas gracias a Ana. I know that Laura is Laura in Mexico. Professor Schwab wanted to hear from you as well.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Luis Alberto, for the invitation to raise the voice around our worries that young generations have due to the fourth industrial revolution in the COVID era. And I have two main worries. And the first one is, as Ana Ruth mentioned, in Latin America, we have specific challenges around inequality. And the second part is that a lot of regulation is being developed, but my main first worry is that politicians and the new generations of politicians who are taking decisions around the fourth industrial revolution don't know the concepts that will transform us. And I've been working in Puentec. We work to develop skills on public servants to understand these concepts and don't make regulations out of fear, but out of a knowledge and a concept and a context in which we need for Latin America. What I've seen, I've been working with Latin startup companies that bring in solutions. For example, Jetty is a Mexican startup company that is shifting public transportation by offering measures around getting into public transportation in a better, safe way and shifting the past from the transportation we had to a new, better, comprehensive one in times of COVID. And we've been giving this technology for free to governments. And what happens is that they don't understand the concepts. They don't embrace the technology resolving a public challenge. And it's been quite a ride to being with them because that's how we understood in Puentec that we need to go further and that our politicians and new generations understand what is Internet of Things, what is artificial intelligence, and don't be afraid around it, but to understand and to embrace this as an opportunity to shift our countries, to find solutions, and always having a knowledge to better regulate. And the other part that we work in the Mexico City's Global Shapers community is that we find that people who are in technology, they are not a diverse group. We made a study and we developed how much was the gender gauge gap in tech industry in Mexico, and women in tech industry earn 30% less. And these differences among, for one side, politicians that don't understand the concept that will transform us, and people in the tech industry that don't have a diversity and have the knowledge to talk to politicians, make these kinds of forums a great opportunity to talk and discuss how to change our reality.
Well, thank you very much to both Ana and Laura and Professor Schwab. Clearly, both of them point to the fact of something that you put in the center of the global discussion, which is your book on the fourth industrial revolution. And in that book, you basically laid out how the world was going to be transformed. And clearly, COVID basically has put it, if you want, this whole need for digital transformation on steroids. How do you see this evolving? I mean, when you wrote this book, you were kind of like sequencing the different industrial revolutions that we had, and you were basically outlining, you know, what artificial intelligence was going to do. And you equally have put a lot of attention on cyber and actually created a center on cyber. How do you see this evolution? And perhaps to both questions, or both Ana and Laura, which essentially are saying, look, this is what we need, but we have this huge digital divide in our hemisphere, from that of the haves and the have-nots, of being able to access these levels of technology, bandwidth, all the things that are needed. Professor Schwab.
President Moreno, if I may, before I answer to this question, just come back to one point which was in Ana and particularly in Laura's contribution, and which is very close to my heart. We speak a lot about gender parity, but what this COVID crisis has brought out is that we need new types of leadership. And I feel when we talk about gender parity, we're talking quantitative terms, which means we should have 50% of women involved in leadership positions. But I would go one step further, and I would say we need at least 50% of female values involved in our decision making, because what we see now is that the values which stand usually for female values like solidarity, like empathy, like emotional intelligence, play a particularly important role in a networked community we are in like now. So, but coming back to your question, when I wrote the book 5 years ago, many of those technologies were considered to be science fiction. And you, President Moreno, you were one of the first who felt, no, those technologies will have an impact, a decisive impact, not only on business models, but on economies, societies, and so on. If I look back, I'm just astonished how fast this technological revolution came over us. And I would say this crisis is a booster for those technologies. Just look what we need in the future in this, let's say, great reset. We need much more anticipatory systems. We have to strengthen our capability to predict. That's what's happening now with artificial intelligence, with big data, with wearable sensors, with tracking devices, and so on. But it's not only, let's say, it's blockchain also, because we want to rely on distributed ledger networks which create more trust. But look, the big other technology which is advanced is certainly synthetic biology. Now, some of the vaccines are based on synthetic biology. And if I would do again science fiction, I could say synthetic biologies combined with quantum computing could give us, for example, the capability to develop a vaccine before even the virus occurs. So all those technologies, and of course, digitalization, we see it with the rise of the platform companies and so on. So what will happen is that those technologies become more and more a strategic weapon. And the supremacy of a country will be based more on the mastership of those technologies. And what is interesting, those new technologies cannot be easily copied. If you have an algorithm, it's much more difficult to copy an algorithm compared to a machine. So I see that the well-being of countries, the soft power, the hard power of countries will so much depend on those new technologies that every country has to make every effort not to be left behind. And here, of course, I can only say the digital infrastructure of a country, as we see now with the need for teleconferencing and so on, the digital and education was mentioned by Anna. I think in order to create new modern educational systems, we need those new technologies.
Thank you, Professor Schwab. And there's so many things that have happened over the years at the forum. You were talking about vaccines. The so-called Gavi Alliance was something that really came out of the forum. You've devoted a lot of time and brought all the different stakeholders. Just on this question that everybody has on their mind about the development of a vaccine and all the challenges. There's over 100 initiatives today happening, but yet the production in the world. How do you see all that happening? I'm sure that's because when you laid the agenda at the beginning, is really a full reset that is going to require a fundamental change and stakeholder capitalism, which is something that you have been really the pioneer. But how do you see that process of coming together to that full reset that you suggest?
I think as long as we cannot measure success, we will not make big progress, because you have to keep someone accountable. And so what the World Economic Forum is doing is we have taken our International Business Council, which is composed by 100 top business leaders around the world. And we told them, look, if you want to practice stakeholdership, it's not sufficient to have somewhere an addendum in the annual report which shows how much is given to philanthropy and so on. No, we have to measure it. And now is the right time, because the crisis, as I have shown in an editorial in Financial Times, the crisis has shown that companies which were practicing stakeholder responsibility are doing much better than those who have just maximization of profits of shareholders in mind. Just look at the weakness, you mentioned it at the beginning, of the American Airlines. Look at how many billions they paid out in share repurchasing programs. And those billions are now missing. So I think we have, now is the time, it's a litmus test for stakeholder responsibility, for stakeholder capitalism. But we have to develop the necessary measurement systems. So we are working together with the 4 big audit firms. There are numerous, let's say, concepts already out on the market, but like with financial reporting, you need a concept of criteria which are universally applied, maybe with some variation according to sector. And that's what we want to bring out first this August, when we meet, when the Board of Trustees meets, we will have the first proposals, and then to roll it out next year, so that hopefully every company will be forced to show in terms of figures how much it has really lived up to the stakeholder concept. But let me add one point. When we say the company has to put emphasis not on short-term profit, but on the long-term viability of the company, because that's what the stakeholder concept stipulates. And if we speak about long-term viability, it's also in the best interest of long-minded shareholders. But we have to apply also a kind of ESG concept to governments and to countries. It has to be replicated on the macro level, what we are doing on the business level. And we should go over, when we measure the success of countries, much more to measure the well-being of its citizens and not just the GDP of a GDP growth which has been achieved.
You know, on ESG that you mentioned, and I will share with you that study that our teams have been doing, just looking in the case of Chile at different levels of investment and looking at returns. Had they included in the portfolio of investments more companies associated with ESG related indices, the returns would have been better as opposed to the conventional returns that they receive. And there's something to be said precisely of what you have been advocating for so long. We have a lot of questions coming from the audience, and I don't want to not include them. One, it says about, you know, you've said that decision-making should include youth and civil society overall, but decision-making is still concentrated in upper levels of government and business. What is your advice or strategy for breaking these barriers and letting other participants be included in this great reset?
I think when we talk about the stakeholder concept, we could make a distinction between the stakeholder concept on a corporate level, which means a company living up to the expectations of all stakeholders, but we could apply the same concept on a national and even on a global level. Because if you look at the national and global level, there are the different stakeholders. There's each citizen, but some trade unions have been mentioned by Anna. There's the young generation, there are women, and so on. I think the time may not completely be right, but even on our national and global level, we have to remind ourselves that we are stakeholders of a shared community. And so if we can combine our democratic systems, which are very important as the base of our national identity and existence, if we combine those basic structures with much more stakeholder engagement, I think then we will make really progress. How we do it, I think at the beginning, it can be achieved not so much by formalized structures, but by bringing people together as the World Economic Forum does, by bringing together from different stakeholder groups and tell them, look, this is the problem, it's a shared problem, what is the solution? And at the end, if you create a shared solution, which is in the interest of everybody, making maybe individual compromises, but in the long run, you are better off.
Professor Schwab, you and the forum has spent a lot of time thinking of the future of work. With all of these consequences of the pandemic, with the huge numbers of unemployment, how do you see the evolution of the future of work? Because clearly this is not similar to the Great Depression, because the reality is that the world economy, as we all saw it back in Davos, we were rather optimistic of what's going forward. That seems like ages ago that we were all in Davos. And now here we are with huge amounts of unemployment as a result of COVID, which could be more assimilated to a major natural disaster. But how do you see the evolution of work towards the future? Because this is certainly something that you've thought a lot about. And of course, at the same time with the gender component that you mentioned at the beginning?
I'm very concerned, and even more concerned now. First, in Davos this year, we announced two big initiatives. I would say initiatives for this decade, for the next 10 years. The first one is in the environmental area with planting 1 trillion trees in the next 10 years, and we are very much engaged into it. And the second one is to skill or reskill 1 billion people for the jobs for tomorrow. But what is happening now with the COVID crisis, it will accelerate the repatriation of production. And if you think how many countries, particularly emerging countries, have relied on becoming in some ways a factory of the world. But now those jobs are repatriated, and the new technologies help very much, because three-dimensional printing, for example, robotization. So we all know that there is a big, let's say, producer of our iPads and our iPhones in Foxconn in China, employing more than 1 billion people, sorry. But apparently, this production could be done with 10,000 people if the fabrication is completely automatized. So the question comes up, what is happening for the young people, particularly in emerging countries, which are coming now on the job market? And here I do not have a easy solution. My response would be, young people have to try. I remember, by the way, just as an anecdote, about 30 years ago, the French Prime Minister Raymond Barre, who was a great economist, we had a discussion on this issue, and he said, I'm foreseeing a future where jobs are not anymore offered, but everybody has to create his own or her own job. And I think we are going into this direction. And and that's the reason why the digital networks are so important for countries, to give those people the opportunity first to learn, to equip themselves, to become entrepreneurs, and then to be a global corporation, even in a very localized, small context. But let me add one last thing here. I feel, and you know, President Moreno, and you have helped so much in this respect, how much I'm committed to the notion of social entrepreneurship. I think in this new era, also characterized more by female values and so on, where solidarity, empathy, and so on are important. I think young people should be motivated more and will be motivated more by doing good and not necessarily by making money. So becoming social entrepreneurs. And if I look at Latin America and my own experience, particularly in Brazil, I have to say there's such a potential for social entrepreneurship, and we have so many fine examples of social entrepreneurs in those countries.
You know, that ties in very well with a number of questions that have come, that basically, as we see the virus is spreading more and more into the Southern Hemisphere, Africa, Latin America, these are countries that don't have the fiscal capabilities that developed countries have in the way of the fiscal response that they need to do. So the larger question that builds a little bit on what you were saying is, what can governments and businesses and society as a whole do to deal with this enormous challenge when we have weak health systems, where we don't have the digital upskills or either the skills or the bandwidth, as both Anna and Laura were saying? How do you envision the kinds of things that we should be focusing in helping to respond to this enormous challenge?
The key at the moment during this hot phase of the crisis is to make sure that we do not have a systems breakdown. And if we look, of course, the developed countries like Germany, which has freed 10% of its global GDP to support the production systems, the employment system, and so on, that's certainly the right way to go. Also, and I completely recognize that it's much more difficult for certain emerging countries. On the other hand, I also have to say, if you look at the debt situation, national debt, some emerging countries are in a better situation compared to countries who are already suffering from a very big debt load, like Italy, Greece, Japan, and so on. So that's one thing. The other thing is the emphasis should be to avoid a breakdown also, of course, in the hospital health system. I think every country should do its utmost. We cannot avoid that people are dying, but we want that people are dying in dignity. So every country should do everything to avoid these horrible situations which we have seen in some of the Italian cities when the public health system was completely overstressed. So at the moment, even whatever the cost, maintaining the system and not to be faced with a breakdown is probably the right policy. Which means, and I know now the experience, even looking at Switzerland, which is coming out of the lockdown, but there are concerns that we are coming out too early and so on. I think the repair job can come later and we can see how we address it. But at the moment, maintaining the system is the priority. And I think you are helping. I saw what you did in Argentina, for example. Great respect.
Thank you, Professor Schwab. And I know our time is running out, but I just like to finish with the following question. You know, knowing you all these years, you have a unique capability. Not only do you thrive with complexity, in dealing with complexity, but equally you always have a way of looking at the positive. And I think, you know, it's very easy to look at all the negatives. When you think about this moment and you outline the kinds of challenges that we have in this great reset, what kinds of things make you optimistic of what you have seen in the last almost 3 months that we have been in this process of confinement throughout the world?
I think we all feel this is the biggest catastrophe which ever happened. I was born just before World War II and experienced the war, and I remember the bombardments and so on, and in what terrible situation Germany was after the war. After the war, the global community of countries were able to learn from the mistakes made after World War I and said, let's come together and let's build a new order for the future. And we should not forget, the world was divided also at that time when the UN was created, when Bretton Woods happened. We already had the beginnings of the Cold War. We had an ideological clash. But nevertheless, we were able to create certain structures which kept the world fairly well together for quite some time. And then 89, after the wall came down, we started a period of unprecedented economic growth, lifting millions of people out of poverty. So we went through such crises. And I think the key will be, and I'm optimistic, that we will use this crisis as a chance again to rebuild a world, to learn from the mistakes in the past, and to rebuild a better world, to have a kind of global renaissance. And we have the I come back to the technology. We have the technology which could help us very much in this process.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Schwab. I think what you say is this global renaissance. I mean, I think if you look at the last renaissance, which we always look at in terms of the explosion of the arts, clearly every time humanity has these kinds of stresses, the best of humanity comes out. And it's with leaders like you that we will see that day forward. So thank you very much for sharing your ideas. And thank you especially to both Anna and Laura. They are, as you correctly said, we're looking to them because they're going to be the architects of this new world. So thank you very much, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you very much, President Moreno. Thank you for everybody who participated. I have a particular strong relationship with Latin America, and I appreciated this opportunity particularly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.